Welcome to War Bios, the podcast where we delve into the most pivotal battles in history, and I'm your host, General Biography. Today, we're going to explore one of the most decisive naval engagements of all time, the Battle of Tsushima. This clash between the Russian and Japanese fleets in 1905 was a turning point in modern warfare, showcasing the power of strategic planning, innovative tactics, and cutting-edge technology. The Russians had been making significant inroads into the region, particularly in Manchuria and Korea, which put them at odds with the emerging power of Japan. The Japanese, determined to protect their interests and sovereignty, began to build a modern navy, one that would eventually challenge Russian dominance. In 1904, tensions between Russia and Japan reached a boiling point as the two nations vied for control of Port Arthur, a strategic naval base in Manchuria. The Russians, meanwhile, were struggling to respond effectively, hampered by poor communication, inadequate logistics, and a lack of clear strategic direction. As the war between Russia and Japan escalated, the Russian Navy's Baltic Fleet, under the command of Admiral Reshaped, was ordered to sail over 18,000 miles to the Far East, a journey that would take months to complete. This daring plan, aimed at relieving the besieged Russian garrison at Port Arthur and crushing the Japanese Navy, was fraught with risk. The Russian fleet would have to navigate treacherous waters, avoid enemy patrols, and overcome significant logistical challenges, all while facing an increasingly confident and well-prepared Japanese opponent. Meanwhile, Admiral Togo and his staff were busy analyzing the Russian Navy's tactics and preparing a comprehensive plan to counter their enemy's strengths. They studied the Russian fleet's composition, its command structure, and its likely courses of action, seeking to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited in battle. The Japanese also invested heavily in modernizing their own navy, adopting advanced technologies such as wireless telegraphy and investing in high-quality ships, guns, and ammunition. The Japanese Navy, with its superior speed, maneuverability, and tactical cohesion, was poised to take on the lumbering Russian fleet, which was struggling to maintain formation and coordinate its movements. The outcome of this battle would depend on a complex interplay of factors, including strategic vision, tactical innovation, and sheer luck. In the months leading up to the Battle of Tsushima, both sides engaged in a series of smaller skirmishes and maneuvers, each seeking to gain an advantage over the other. The Japanese launched a series of raids against Russian ships and ports, while the Russians attempted to disrupt Japanese supply lines and communication networks. These preliminary clashes set the tone for the main event, as both navies honed their skills and refined their tactics in preparation for the ultimate showdown. As the Russian Baltic Fleet approached the Tsushima Strait on May 26, 1905, Admiral Togo's Japanese fleet was deployed in a crescent-shaped formation, carefully positioned to maximize their tactical advantages. The Japanese had chosen a location where the Russians would be forced to sail in a narrow column, vulnerable to attack from both sides. At 1:45 p.m., the Japanese cruiser Izumi spotted the Russian fleet and immediately relayed the information to Admiral Togo via wireless telegraphy. Admiral Reshaped's Russian fleet was organized into 3 divisions, with his flagship, the battleship Suvorov, at the head of the 1st Division. However, the Russians were struggling to maintain formation due to the poor condition of their ships and the inexperience of their crews. As they entered the Tsushima Strait, the Japanese fleet began to close in on them from both sides. At 2:10 p.m., Admiral Togo gave the order to attack, and the Japanese battleship Mikasa led the charge, firing its guns at the Russian flagship Suvorov. The Russians returned fire, but their gunnery was inaccurate and ineffective due to their outdated fire control systems. Meanwhile, the Japanese destroyers and torpedo boats launched a series of daring attacks against the Russian ships, using their superior speed and maneuverability to evade the enemy's return fire. As the battle raged on, the Japanese continued to exploit the weaknesses in the Russian formation. At 3:00 p.m., Admiral Togo ordered his fleet to execute a clever tactical maneuver known as crossing the T, where the Japanese ships formed a perpendicular line across the bow of the Russian column. This allowed the Japanese to bring all their guns to bear on the Russians while limiting their own exposure to enemy fire. The consequences of this maneuver were devastating for the Russians. The Suvorov was hit repeatedly, and by 4:00 p.m. it had suffered severe damage, including a direct hit on its conning tower that killed Admiral Reshaped's flag captain. As the Russian flagship began to falter, the rest of the fleet became increasingly disorganized, with ships colliding with each other or straggling behind. By 6:00 p.m., the Japanese had gained complete control of the battle, and the Russians were in full retreat. The Japanese continued to pursue their enemy, sinking several Russian ships and damaging many others. As night began to fall, Admiral Togo called off the pursuit, content with the overwhelming victory his fleet had achieved. As the sun set on May 27, 1905, the Russian Baltic Fleet lay in ruins, with over 20 ships sunk or captured and more than 3,000 sailors killed or wounded. The Japanese, on the other hand, had suffered relatively minor losses, with only 3 torpedo boats damaged and just 117 sailors killed or wounded. Admiral Togo's tactical genius and the superior training of his crew had given Japan a crushing victory that would change the course of naval history forever. In the aftermath of the battle, Admiral Togo reflected on the significance of the Japanese victory, noting that the success of our tactics was due to the fact that we were able to adapt ourselves to the changing circumstances of the battle. This ability to adapt and innovate had allowed the Japanese to overcome the numerical superiority of their enemy and achieve a decisive victory. As the news of the Battle of Tsushima spread around the world, it sent shockwaves through the naval community. The defeat of the Russian Baltic Fleet marked a major turning point in the development of naval warfare, as it highlighted the importance of speed, maneuverability, and tactical innovation on the high seas. The Japanese victory also cemented Admiral Togo's reputation as one of the greatest naval commanders in history, and his name became synonymous with brilliant tactics and strategic genius. The battle also had significant consequences for the Russian Navy, which was forced to reevaluate its tactics and strategies in the wake of this crushing defeat. The Russians realized that their outdated ships and tactics were no match for the modern Japanese fleet, and they began to invest heavily in new technologies and training programs to improve their naval capabilities. As the dust settled on the aftermath of the Battle of Tsushima, the Japanese Navy continued to assert its dominance over the remnants of the Russian Baltic Fleet. The surviving Russian ships were either sunk or captured, and by May 29, 1905, the Japanese had taken control of the strategic port of Vladivostok, crippling Russia's ability to project power in the region. The Treaty of Portsmouth, signed on September 5, 1905, officially brought an end to the Russo-Japanese War. The treaty marked a significant shift in the global balance of power, as Japan emerged as a major naval power, while Russia was forced to cede control of several key territories, including Sakhalin Island and the Liaodong Peninsula. In the years that followed, the Battle of Tsushima would be remembered as a pivotal moment in modern naval history. As Admiral Togo himself observed, the battle was not just a victory for Japan, but a revolution in naval warfare. The innovative tactics employed by the Japanese Navy, including the use of destroyers and torpedo boats, would influence naval strategy for decades to come. Today, the Battle of Tsushima is commemorated as a national holiday in Japan, with ceremonies held annually at the Togo Shrine in Tokyo. The battle is also remembered in Russia, where it is seen as a turning point in the country's modern history. As one Russian historian noted, the defeat at Tsushima marked the beginning of a long period of naval reform and modernization in Russia, which would ultimately contribute to the country's emergence as a global superpower. The legacy of the Battle of Tsushima can be seen in the development of naval warfare in the 20th century. The emphasis on speed, maneuverability, and tactical innovation that characterized the Japanese Navy's victory at Tsushima would influence the design of warships and the development of naval doctrine for generations to come. In the words of Admiral Togo, the sea is a mighty and unforgiving environment where only the strongest and most cunning can emerge victorious. The Battle of Tsushima remains an enduring testament to the power of innovative tactics, strategic thinking, and sheer determination on the high seas. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.